Welcome to the Compost Pile, a podcast where we break down gardening, homesteading, and more. Join your hosts, David Poole and Aaron Barnhill, as they pile up information and break it down so that you can be more successful in the garden. Hey guys, welcome back to the Compost Pile, your source for all things gardening and homesteading. Today I'm here with our friend Paul Lemoine, and we're going to talk a little bit about maybe the upcoming season change that's happening, where we're transitioning from spring to summer, and with that brings a whole lot of problems in the garden, and we find that most people are probably not quite prepared for that, especially new people out there, first year, or there's maybe it's second season and they're still figuring their way. They're just not prepared. They have these beautiful plants, and then all of a sudden the problems come on. And it's not that they're doing anything wrong, it's the environment changing, and they're not changing with the environment. So kind of wanted to maybe talk through some tips and tricks and maybe some of the trials that we've had facing some of these issues that we might come up with. What's some problems that you commonly have every season as we get out of this last bit of cool weather, and then just we get this intense heat coming on?
Okay. Well, first, about this time of the year, and actually a little earlier, I start seeing the juvenile leaf-footed stink bug. You'll see clusters of them.
Yep.
Maybe a dozen or two. Don't confuse them with the assassin bug, which is a beneficial. These are always going to be in a bunch of them, and you'll see them. They're crawling around. They're kind of black and orange.
Yep.
Small. There'll be a whole cluster of them.
A little gang of them.
You'll walk by there and see them kind of skitter off a little bit. Now's the time to get rid of those if you can, and they're easy with just some soapy water spray or something, or some people like to vacuum them up or whatever, but they're pretty skittish. But you just spray soapy water on them, they'll fall to the ground.
Yeah, so that heat, and it's kind of, it's warm weather,
Well,
and not necessarily stink bugs, but other pests that commonly come on become real prominent, and you go from maybe a little bit of pest pressure to it just exploding.
Yeah.
And that happens really prominently when it gets hotter, and it kind of correlates to higher stress on the plants and the soil. So some pests are going to be there because of plant issues, stress issues. They're indicators. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that I always see with the season change really is moisture control.
Absolutely.
People, they're always just watering the same, and they're not really paying attention to the soil, and they're not getting proper saturation. So then their plants start stressing. Then they start watering more, but then they're still always a little bit behind, or they're watering too frequently, not deeply enough. You gotta get your hands in the dirt, I feel, at least from my experience. And it could change from bed to bed in a raised bed scenario. I have some beds where they dry out twice as fast as ones on the other side of the garden, and it's just simply how the sun is blocked by certain, structural or other larger plants like trees. And I got to stick my hands in the dirt and pay attention to them, because I'm either overwatering or underwatering.
Yeah, it's really easy, and a good rule of thumb is if you're in a raised bed, they generally tend to dry out a lot quicker, because a lot of them have a metal side type structure or something. Well, that sun heats it up, and it heats it up hot enough you can't hardly put your hand on it. It's so hot. So what it's doing is it's also drying out whatever moisture you do have in there a lot quicker than an in-ground garden.
Right.
And so an in-ground garden, you get away with maybe not watering so frequently, but in a raised bed, you have to be, it's absolutely critical that you deep water in a raised bed.
Yeah.
And I've seen it time again, you go over and you look like you got a little water standing there, I'm good. And then you go back, I see a weed, you go to pull the weed up and right up underneath the soil, how about that pouring?
Real dry. Yeah.
And so that just tells you you're not deep watering enough.
No, you got to get it where it's, is saturated.
It's got to soak down in there.
This time of year, it's not uncommon to see that top layer change colors.
Oh, yeah.
Change colors really quickly back to a lighter color But if you're watering deep enough and long enough, you're going to have that saturation deeper where you need it. It's not uncommon. People look out there like, oh, it looks okay. But again, your plants are going to tell you as you change if you're not watering enough, watching for wilting. And me and Aaron always talk about this, how characteristically I find that, like, I'll try to put my bell peppers or my sweet peppers in places that get less direct summer afternoon sun.
Evening sun, right.
Because they are thirsty.
Yep.
2 to 3 times more than the hot peppers. Like, I go on the other side, the habaneros or whatever hot pepper I have will thrive, and I can let it be in the hottest bed I have, and everything is just fine.
Yeah.
But the bell pepper over here, it's like, please just give it to me.
I know they don't like that. The hot peppers you can grow in the desert. Just about,
Yep. Yeah.
Bell peppers are finicky, and mine were doing that same thing. Had some wilting going on. I got a drip system, and I had to change my days on it because I could tell that they were stressing some.
Yep.
And it was strictly with water. It wasn't nutrients or anything. It's strictly water related.
Yeah.
And so that's something you got to look at. But you'll see, especially as it gets hot, because it's been in the upper 80s. Now you're getting close to that temperature range, especially for tomatoes. When you start hitting that 90 degrees, well, they're gonna stop setting fruit.
Yeah.
And you're gonna think you're doing something wrong. Well, it's not that.
And that happens a lot with people who plant later in the
They
season.
plant, like spring break or April 1st. Like,
Yeah, the Easter or Good Friday planters nowadays.
That's late because now you missed a prime opportunity to set all your fruit. And so there's some ways to get around that a little bit if you're using shade cloths.
Yeah.
On the I guess the western side of it for the evening sun, if you can knock some of that temperature down, and what I'm talking about is shade cloths. People may or may not know it's a light textile fabric, like
it's
a woven fabric that light will go through, water will go through.
Yep.
But it may knock down 50% of the UV radiation.
You can get them a lot of times like 30% all the way to like 90%.
Yeah, exactly.
If you want.
Yeah.
60% is pretty common, I think. But and people think, oh, that's too much. But you'd be surprised.
Now, summertime,
I feel like having grown in the last 4 years under like oak canopies, thinking that I wasn't going to be able to grow a garden because it was technically shade.
Yeah.
Completely proved that filtered or like a fair amount of filtered light and blocking those hot rays makes a world of difference.
Yep.
That's one I never could drive home enough, is like thinking about ways where you could add shade. Not every garden needs it, but if you're going to be in that mid to afternoon sun as we reach now, coming up on May, through the rest of the summer, and even in your fall garden, going from the beginning of fall into some of the late fall crops.
Right. Absolutely.
Same thing applies. Like even in a shade garden like I have, somewhat shade, I still can't. In the fall, I can't grow broccoli or cauliflower. They bolt every time because it's still too hot in those areas. So temperature, it really plays a huge role in kind of how things thrive. And really, it's the main factor that's changing. Just the intensity of the sun. And it's affecting the water. It's affecting the pests. It's affecting the plants.
So it stresses. These plants are stressed, and they're stressed right now. Even though, now it's because we've had a long dry spell. Then we had 2 inches of rain, and then 5 or 6 days of no rain. Well, you should have been watering before now. Even after that rain, that 2 inches
is gone.
Long gone.
Yeah,
long gone.
That's
now we're fixing to hit 49, 50 degrees.
Everything looked really, really awesome for like 24 hours, and then I went out there and some of my stuff was wilted already. I'm like, it's one day. Like, how is this possible?
So you got to pay those things because those plants are getting stressed, and like you said early on, now that's when they're susceptible to some of these pests coming in, and so they are stressed, even though they look great. I'm seeing stress in different areas.
And one thing that that to me also can play a role into the stress of plants for most home gardeners. And you can see this when you get those rains and everything just explodes with growth because that rain has so much nutrition and minerals and things in it. If you're like me at home and you don't have a choice but to water with municipal water for most of my beds, that plays a huge factor in the health of the soil long term and the plants, because that water does not have the same caliber of resources that you get naturally.
Right.
It's got chlorine, it's got things that are going to sterilize soil microbes and bacteria. Yeah.
Right.
So at the end of the day, you're watering for the benefit of the plant and the soil, but at the same time, if all you have is municipal water, there's some other things to think about long term, and that's a conversation for another day.
I was thinking that would be a great topic.
Yeah.
We'll talk about rain barrels and stuff.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, there's a rain barrel class coming up through the AgriLife Extension Office.
I see that every year. That's all.
Yeah, that's a great class, and sells out every year, and it's a great way to capture your own rainwater. And I've even known people to put municipal water in it, fill it up with that, but let it air out. Let the chlorine.
The chlorine will dissipate off like
that stuff. It's still better.
Yeah.
That way. But if you can't just capture rainwater is great to capture, and we have enough rain where you can fill your water barrels.
Yeah, don't take much. So
and use gravity fed. So you can even put a drip system that's gravity fed on it. They'll work. So that's like I said.
It's a whole
other hour class.
I think one of the most prominent things that, and it's probably the most difficult problem that I find when we're transitioning from spring to summer, and it is onset by heat, is viral diseases. So, and that's really a big one now because a lot of, spring it's cooler, so it's really easy for plants to grow a lot of vegetative growth. They get really big, they look really nice. Then they start setting fruit, and then it gets hot and they start getting stressed. But it also increases the humidity. And that's when you mentioned earlier about the temperature for tomatoes.
Right.
That humidity is the real reason why the tomatoes will no longer set fruit, because it makes the pollen sticky, and then you don't get pollination any longer. A tomato is not a bee or pollinated plant technically. I mean, they pollinate themselves. The male and female parts are all in the same flower.
Right. It's gotta be agitated.
Yeah, gotta be. And
if it's sticky,
it doesn't happen. So that humidity plays a huge role, and that's why for some things planting early is important. That's why tomatoes, I think, getting them in earlier nowadays is always better, because the humidity is always not great here, but it gets exponentially more dense and sticky really quick. But that humidity also it brings on diseases, and we see that a lot in tomatoes mostly. You can see it in eggplants or even peppers. You get like early or late blight.
Right. And that's coming on right now. I noticed today.
Yeah.
On some tomato plants here locally. So that's one to look for. And like we probably even talked about before, that's one of the reasons you want to make sure that you have plenty of a room around your tomato plants where you don't plant them too close together, where you can have some airflow through there, especially from the ground level up to the first limbs. If your tomato leaves are laying on the dirt, and you do get a rain or you're watering overhead and you get that soil splashing up, and you got the humidity, you got the heat.
That's
all the time. I mean, it's like a feature dish there.
Those pathogens get up on the leaves, and then
it's gonna happen.
And then you finally get a good rain, and then now it's moving it through. But that's that humidity. If you don't have enough airflow, it's trapped up under the leaves. The moisture is there, and it makes that plant far more prone for that viral disease to just explode. And it doesn't only just affect the plant itself; it can affect, like, you can see even like somebody came in the other day and they were showing me one, and it had the typical splotchy leaves, but the stems started turning black, and I was like, oh, but like, I don't remember ever seeing that. So I got to researching a little bit, and that was one of the signs of like a pretty well developed early blight on the plant. And then it can, if it gets that developed, it can affect the fruit. And blight's one of those diseases you want to try to avoid at all costs, because if you are a small home gardener and you don't have multiple beds, that pathogen can stay active in the soil for multiple seasons. And you go back and you plant that same thing, and you're just like, hey, it's like feeding an animal. It's like, come on, give it to me. And then it's gonna grow, and then it'll be there again and again. So crop rotation.
Well, I just think crop rotation is one of the main reasons why they recommend crop rotation, because you don't have those same pathogens.
Yeah,
especially when you talk about tomatoes.
And it is important too, as we live in such a volatile climate, and every season isn't going to be the same. Not every season disease is going to be as prominent as others. But if you're doing things to disrupt the cycle of disease and viruses and even pests by moving things around, you can mitigate some of those common problems that are going to start right about now. I know you mentioned before tomatoes, and this can go for other types of plants, but I always think it's a great idea to keep plants up off the soil level, and this even goes for melons, cucurbits, squash. We've talked about pine straw like 100 times.
Oh yeah,
keeping the leaves off of the soil if it's a ground cover type plant, so that your moisture is not as easily splashing up with soil splashing up, because those plants are susceptible to similar type diseases.
Right.
But then pruning, tomatoes, peppers, even eggplants, as they get sizable enough, taking the time and doing it early is really best. Clipping off those lower, branches that are not necessarily fruiting branches, and get you some space between soil, get some airflow up on the bottom, and that airflow will work its way through the top.
I think people are scared to prune.
Yeah, I mean,
it's like, man, that's a perfectly help. Look at that leaf right there and all that. But, hey, clip it off, gives you some space above that soil.
And
it'll thrive on airflow.
I think it's important, because you mentioned earlier, tomatoes planted too many in a space, and there's no airflow. Well, mine are caged and they're staked, but I have 3, and they're probably indeterminates, but they get long and leggy, and I keep them kind of pruned so they're not growing onto the ground. But
yeah,
it's almost like a dense wall, and I got to look in there. But early on, I pruned off that lower section, and if I need to, and they keep growing and they're getting real big again, I will continue to cut on it, and I'll make it more bushy just by trying to keep that size in check.
If you look at, I was in a commercial greenhouse once, and I walked in, and I was saying, look at all these tomatoes hanging around. Where's the leaves at? They do so much heavy pruning in greenhouses because they're even more susceptible to disease in there. And there's hardly any leaves. They were left at the top, but I mean, as you go along, you just have wads of tomatoes and hardly any leaves until you got closer to the top of the plant. Well, that's the reason why they're doing that. So it goes to show the plant's still going to grow.
Oh yeah.
And of course, those were indeterminate. I mean, they were indeterminate. You're on forever, but they got to show you're not going to kill that tomato plant by pruning those lower leaves. Especially when I do it at planting right off the bat. I may take 2 or 3 branches and just leave the top 1 or 2, put them in there. They take off, and then as they get bigger, as soon as they start sagging down there, get close to the soil or touching the soil, I clip those off too.
Yeah.
You're gonna if you happen to get one that's fruiting, no big deal.
Yeah, it happens.
It's going to store the energy in.
I always end up clipping one that's I think I see the right one, and I clip the wrong one.
That happens.
Then a tomato falls off, and I'm like,
it's going to happen. It'll survive and it'll thrive actually. So don't be scared to do something.
No, I think the last thing before we wrap this episode up, as you move into this seasonal shift, one thing that could drastically help the strength of your plants and your soil, especially if you're container growing, is not only is your watering regimen and just your cultural practices change, but I really also think that people should consider changing their feeding schedule.
Yeah.
Supplemental feeding, if spraying the foliage for mineral intake, with like a liquid fertilizer. If you're doing containers, you can soil drench, but making sure that you're providing extra resources, because just like us, if plants are getting stressed, if instead you go work out, you burn more calories. You got to eat more to replenish those nutrients and things that you need for your body to be healthy. Plants are the same way. They're going to start using up more resources in the soil, more food to stay healthy, because they're still growing, and a lot of them have stopped vegetative growth. Maybe now they're fruiting. That takes more energy and resources. So more supplemental feeding, or if you haven't been supplemental feeding, consider doing it. And it's simple. At least you can do it up to once every 2 weeks with something of your choice. Usually I like to stick to an organic, because I don't want to feed a lot of like high nitrogen based liquids, because at this point we don't want a lot of vegetative growth. We want fruit growth.
Strong roots, right?
But I feel that's one thing that people leave out, because they're like, oh, I put something in the soil, I fed it earlier.
I fed it when I planted it.
Yep.
It's good to go. It says it's good for 6 weeks or whatever,
Yep.
But yeah, as the temperature rises and you got the increased microbial activity in the soil, so it's using some of your nutrients that you're putting in there. So I'm the same way. I like an organic fertilizer, a time release type, like a microlife pelleted. So every time you get some water on there, and that's another thing. If you start watering like quite a bit more because of the temperature or something, like that, well, it's going to go through that fertilizer a little bit quicker because you're actually drenching it.
Yeah, it's
breaking down. So you may be able to pick it up a little bit or a little heavier.
I'll do, I fertilized the beds in February when I first started, and now we're about to move into May. I'm about to do a supplemental feeding, and I'm gonna shake some over my beds, and I'll try to work it in, depending on, most of my beds are pretty covered up, but I'm gonna shake it in there, give it a good watering, and then I'll go on about my business. But I know that I'm keeping it supplied. So even though some of my things over the next 45 days are going to start, working their way down, production's going to slow down, like tomatoes. A lot of the varieties I chose, they're going to be done.
Right.
So I'm probably going to get rid of those, but at least those nutrients are going to be in the soil for the next thing that's coming along. And we've talked about this in a previous episode. If you are having problems struggling with some things that are planting now, or if you did plant early and things are moving out, be thinking ahead for those hot season crops. You can check a couple episodes back. We talked about okra and southern peas, like purple holes.
That's what I like on it.
There's still something.
Just planted okra and they're up, and a lot of people plant them early, but usually they get close to May 1st about the time I start planting okra.
Yep, I did mine just the other day as well. Because
I'm pulling the 10-15 onions right now. They're all coming up. They're all breaking over, and they're ready to pull. I got about half of them pulled, and then the new potatoes that I planted in February are just about ready.
Yeah, and you can, and some of those items like okra and stuff, we went in and we planted them in between things that we know are about to come up. We're going to go ahead and let them start getting started. I'm not going to wait until the bed's completely empty, depending on what I have. If I've got a big plant with a big root system and it's going to be cumbersome to get out, I'll wait. But if, I've gone behind before and planted okra in my onion bed because I know they're about to be pulled out. So you can do different things and start plants and get them ahead, ready to go before as things are coming out.
Yeah, it's a good time to plant a secondary crop of some peas.
Yeah,
of any of the field peas or snap beans or anything like that behind the onions and potatoes, because they've depleted the soil somewhat, and it's going to help fix the nitrogen back in there. And it's a good time to have a secondary growth, because you can plant those pretty much throughout the summer if you keep them watered. And so you got succession planting there. One thing we didn't talk about is companion planting or trap plants. Planting marigolds and what I was trying to think of the other herb that's good planting around is tomato stuff that helps.
Yeah, like basil.
Basil.
Yeah,
basil and marigolds are great to be planting. Amongst your crops, and they look great, and then they help cool the soil because they'll actually cover a lot of open area.
And those are things, if we try to keep those. We've talked about herbs and whatnot before, but those are all some things that you can do that will help you along the way as we get into this like season change, and all these common problems become more prominent. There are ways that you can help fortify your garden, attracting predators, attracting beneficial insects. Then those herbs also have repelling properties for a lot of insects, and like you're saying, trap crops.
They look cool too. The different kinds of stuff in there.
A great. Not a lot of people plant them. I mean, a lot of people do, but I don't see them a lot in my gardening. But I found a great trap plant to be for stink bugs is sunflowers. Sunflower.
I did read that somewhere. Yeah.
Sunflower. So many people will come in. Actually, Aaron, a couple. Maybe 2 weeks ago, he sent me a photo of a sunflower head. It was at the end, so it was about to fall over. It was covered in stink bugs. So great way to just go over there and like chop it into a bucket.
Right.
And
The whole thing.
you just eliminated who knows how many, other sets of generations from that one family of stink bugs. So that's another trap crop I think that people could experiment with if they have the space to do it. So
Yeah, 'cause they say every stink bug you kill this year, that's one less you'll have next year.
Yeah.
And so that's why I like to catch them in that juvenile stage where they're easy to kill. And you don't get them. And another thing I just noticed here the last couple of days is those eastern lopers, grasshoppers.
Okay.
The little juveniles are out right now. So it look like a little grasshopper that's got a little red stripe on them.
Okay, I've seen those
They
before.
turn into
Giant ones.
giant ones here in a couple of months. They're out clustered now out in the grass. So that's another one to be looking at.
Huh, cool.
They don't like soapy water either. So
Yeah. I don't think
keep a bucket of soapy water and they're easy to grab hold of.
toss them in
Toss
there
'em
and
in.
get rid of them.
The chickens won't even eat them. They don't like them. That's crazy. The thing, I tried to fish with the bass won't eat them. So whatever.
Not good for anything.
Nah, just put them in soapy water. Compost.
Awesome. I think we've covered quite a few good things. Maybe there'll be some tips for some people as we move into summer. So I hope you found some value out of this episode, and we'll catch you on the next one here on the Compost Pile.